All right, so let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue our look at schedules and theories of reinforcement. And specifically today, we're going to focus on schedules of reinforcement and take a look at the behavior characteristics that occur on certain schedules of reinforcement. So we're going to take a look at various types of human behavior and how they're shaped by these schedules of reinforcement. So for example, if you're a gamer, or if you know a gamer, if you have a gamer in your life, you know that they are very unwilling to interrupt a particular play session. So do not try to interrupt a gamer when they're in the middle of trying to get to a particular achievement. So whether they're playing solo or whether the parents are saying, you know, it's your bedtime, you got to wrap this up, even if there's a save function where they can stop, what you'll find is that they tend to just want to play through until they unlock that achievement. So whether or not it's their bedtime, whether or not they're trying to make a movie, they continue to play until they hit a certain achievement, at which point it's very easy to turn off the game and put it away. So we're going to see why that's a direct consequence of the schedules of reinforcement that are built into many of the games that we have today. We're also going to take a look at why certain, or another schedule of reinforcement that leads to not an incredibly high rate of behavior, but a very steady rate of behavior. So we're going to take a look at a schedule of reinforcement that is used in slot machines that leads people to sit there and just go over and over and over again. And importantly, not even take breaks after they've been reinforced. So this is a schedule of reinforcement that's used in slot machines. It's also used in most mobile games. So for example, if you've ever played Candy Crush, especially if you're on a level that is difficult to beat, or any other sort of game where you're going to different levels, you know from experience that once you complete that level, it's almost immediately on to the next one, right? So you don't put the game away. You're like, oh, I'm trying to beat level 181. Finally, I beat level 181. Let's do 182. So why is it that there's no pause in playing a casino slot machine or in playing a lot of these mobile games like Candy Crush? We're going to take a look at another schedule of reinforcement that leads to a very low but continuous level of behavior. The best example of this in our society used to be Facebook, until they had those automatic push notifications being sent to your phone. But you might want to try this experiment on yourself if you are involved in social media. Turn off those push notifications to your phone and see how often you check your Twitter account or your Instagram feed or your Snapchat account. You won't be on there all day. You won't be on there checking every 5 seconds. What you'll probably do is you'll check it in the morning, you'll check it in the afternoon, maybe mid-afternoon, and maybe before you go to bed. So why is it that you don't get that sort of continuous high level for social media feedback if you turn off your push notifications? We'll look at that as well. And we'll also take a look at why it's a horrible idea if you have children and you want to make sure that they're playing nicely, you want to make sure that they're not yelling at each other or doing rear naked chokes. You want to make sure that they're actually playing nicely. We'll take a look at why it's an absolutely horrible idea to check in on your children at regular intervals. So if you check in on your children every 10 minutes on, like clockwork, even if they don't have a clock in their room, even if they don't have a way of telling time, even if they don't know how to tell time, you will still get mostly fighting for the 10 minutes up until the period is about to expire, and then they'll start hugging it out. So we'll take a look at why these kind of patterns of behaviors emerge, and we'll take a look at how they're a direct consequence of those schedules of reinforcement. So we'll start off by taking a look at schedules of reinforcement, continuous schedules versus the new idea, the intermittent schedules. We'll take a look at the 4 basic intermittent schedules, and then we'll end with a bit of a challenge for non-contingent schedules, and I'll ask you to come up with an alternative explanation for this effect that's seen here. So there was a study done by Kuhn back in 1998 where he looked at the effects of non-contingent schedules on high-level performance. So he took a look at the mean number of innings pitched by pitchers in the major league, and he took a look at what year they were in their contract. And typically after the third year is where you need to renegotiate your contract. And he specifically looked at pitchers who signed guaranteed contracts, meaning that their salary was not dependent upon performance. So these are the contracts where they get however many millions of dollars a year, even if they don't throw a single pitch, even if they're injured the second day after a contract and they're on the sidelines, they keep getting that money. So it's non-contingent on performance. And what he found is that even at that high level, even in the professional level, once you had that non-contingent scheduled reinforcement, your performance decreased over the next few years. So we'll take a look at that. What does it say about non-contingent schedules? And also, we'll have a challenge trying to come up with an alternative explanation for what might be going on here. All right, so let's start off with schedules of reinforcement. Back to our rat in our Skinner box. And so far, when you've been working with Sniffy, when you've been working on your assignments, we've had Sniffy on what's known as a continuous reinforcement schedule. And a continuous reinforcement schedule is where each operant response is reinforced. So Sniffy gets a piece of food every single time he presses a bar. A vending machine that is working correctly will be on a continuous reinforcement schedule. You put in the money, you get your candy bar. You put in the money, you get your drink. It's not a gambling system where you put in your money and maybe this time, you'll get it. So continuous reinforcement schedules are where you get reinforced every single time. There are a lot of reinforcement schedules in the real world, like the vending machine, that are on continuous reinforcement schedules. But more common are schedules of reinforcement that are intermittent reinforcement schedules. In an intermittent reinforcement schedule, this is where only some operant responses are reinforced. This is where only once in a while do you get reinforced for doing a particular behavior. So if Sniffy had to press the bar 5 times before he received reinforcement, that would be an example of a partial reinforcement schedule, also known as an intermittent reinforcement schedule. So not every response is being reinforced, only some of the responses are being reinforced. And as we're going to see, depending upon how that sum of the responses is determined, that gives us 4 basic intermittent schedules that leads to 4 very characteristic patterns of behavior. So what happens, or what are the possibilities when you only reinforce some of the operant behaviors? Well, the 4 basic schedules of reinforcement, 4 basic intermittent schedules, they're much like the 4 basic contingencies in that they're made up of 2 components. So the first component is whether the schedule is on a ratio or whether it's on an interval. So we'll go into more detail for these in just a moment. So first component, whether it's a ratio intermittent schedule or a interval intermittent schedule, and then whether it's a fixed schedule or is it a variable schedule. And you can get every single combination of those 2 components. So let's take a look into it a little bit more in detail. So if you have a schedule, you can have a ratio schedule, and this means that the reinforcement is dependent upon the number of responses. So it takes a certain number of responses in order to earn a reinforcement. You have to do a certain number of behaviors before you get reinforced for that behavior. So for a ratio schedule, it depends on the number of responses. If that number of responses is the same every time, that's called a fixed ratio schedule, and that's our first intermittent schedule. So if you get reinforced every 10 times you press the bar, you are on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. The other type of ratio schedule is where you don't get reinforced for a certain number of responses every single time. You get reinforced for an average number of responses. So maybe sometimes it'll be 8 responses and then you get a reinforcement. Sometimes it'll be 10 and then you get a reinforcement. Sometimes you need to go 12 and then you get a reinforcement. But on average, it'll take 10 responses before you get a reinforcement. That's a ratio scale because it's dependent on the number of responses, but it's a variable ratio scale because the number of responses required changes every single time. So that's the two intermittent schedules, the two ratio intermittent schedules. We have a fixed ratio schedule where after a certain number of responses, every single time you'll receive a reinforcement, or a variable ratio schedule where after an average number of responses, you'll receive your reinforcement. The other major type of intermittent schedule is the interval intermittent schedule. And for an interval intermittent schedule, this is where your first response after a period of time has elapsed gets reinforced. All right, so an interval schedule is where you have to wait a certain amount of time, and once that period of time has expired, your first response after that time is going to result in reinforcement. A fixed interval intermittent schedule is where that interval of time stays the same. So maybe your first response after 5 minutes is going to be reinforced every single time. That's a fixed interval scale. On the other hand, the interval that you need to wait could be variable. It could change after every reinforcement. That's a variable interval schedule of reinforcement, and that's where you have to wait on average a certain amount of time, but you don't exactly know how much time you need to wait. Excuse me. All right, so we have those 4 basic schedules. Let's take a look at them in a little bit more detail. So we'll start off with the fixed ratio schedule. So in a fixed ratio schedule, the reinforcement is contingent. It happens after a fixed number of responses. Sniffy has to press the bar for a certain number of times, and he has to press the bar that number of times each interval in order to get reinforced. So if Sniffy was on a fixed ratio 20, so that's how it's written out, FR20. Do not read it as FR20, read it as fixed ratio 20. What that indicates is that the lever press, the operant behavior, is going to result in reinforcement, is going to result in the presentation of food, but only after 20 lever presses. And it's going to come after every 20 lever presses. So you press it 20 times, you get food. You press it another 20 times, you get food. You press it 10 times, no food. You go take a break, come back later, press it another 10 times. 10 plus 10 is 20. You get yourself some food. So fixed ratio 20, food is delivered after every 20 responses, or in this case, lever presses. And you can have any fixed ratio that you want. So it could be a fixed ratio of 57, in which case food would be delivered after, in this instance, 57 lever presses. So the key here is that the number of responses is determined. It's known ahead of time. It's basically the same every single time that Sniffy has to or is looking to get reinforced. All right, so one of the reasons why psychologists have analyzed these 4 different types of behavior is because, number one, they exist in the world. So there are examples in our world of reinforcement schedules that are fixed ratio schedules. But the big reason is that they lead to characteristic types of behavior. They lead to very specific patterns of behavior, and they can help us understand human behavior. When we recognize those patterns, we can understand the schedule of reinforcement that they're on. So one of the places you can find fixed ratio schedules is in video games. Video games are littered with these fixed ratio schedules. You have to have a certain number of responses, and then you get reinforced. So a game that came out a few years ago, Skyrim, one of these RPG games where you have to level up your characters as a typical feature of a lot of games these days. Leveling up your character is getting reinforced, right? So when you get from level 1 to level 2, getting that level 2 designation, that's your reinforcement. Going from level 2 to level 3, getting that level 3 designation, that's your reinforcement. You get extra weapons, you get a more powerful character. Those reinforcements, those levels up, we're on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. So you know exactly how many points you need in order to go from level 1 to level 2. You need 100 experience points. In other words, you are on a fixed ratio 100 schedule where you have to go from 0 experience points all the way up to 100 experience points. To get from level 2 to level 3, you needed 125 experience points. You were on a fixed ratio schedule, a fixed ratio 125 schedule, and so on and so forth. For level 4, again, it was a fixed ratio. You needed 150 experience points. For level 5, it was 175. And if you went all the way to level 25, you needed to get 675 experience points. And again, that's another way of saying you were on a fixed ratio 675 experience points schedule. So you didn't get reinforced for your first experience point that you get. In this case, you wouldn't get reinforced for the 500th experience point that you get. But once you get 675, then you get that reinforcement. So as we're going to see, this leads to a very specific type of behavior. But one of the things that I want to mention is that you'll be doing this with Sniffy, where you're putting him on a fixed ratio schedule. And one of the things that game designers are usually very good at is they're usually very good at expanding the fixed ratio so that they're not encountering what's known as ratio strain. So for example, in Skyrim, that first level up occurs after only 100 experience points. In a lot of these games, when you start playing them within the first 20 minutes, you'll experience your first level up. The next level up takes a little bit longer. The one after that takes a little bit longer. But as players get used to these fixed ratio schedules, they get used to the longer and longer times until they get to that 25th level, or they're trying to get to that 25th level, and all of a sudden 675 experience points really doesn't seem like that much to them. So Skyrim avoided this idea of ratio strain. It avoided the increase in that fixed ratio. It avoided too much of an increase in the fixed ratio over time. If you opened up the game and you were staring at 675 points for your first level up, and you did the math and you realized that this was going to take you 3 weeks of grinding before you can even get up to the next level, that's when you rage quit on a game and you basically say this is stupid, and you go to the online forums and you start slinging criticisms at the game. That is exactly what happened with Star Wars Battlefront 2. So Star Wars Battlefront 2, out of the box, had a lot of fixed ratio schedules, had a lot of other issues too, but it had a lot of fixed ratio schedules that had way too intermittent schedules. They were way too long. So some fans did the analysis, and right when you start, right from day one, if you wanted the most popular characters, like Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, even if you wanted lesser popular characters like Princess Leia or Chewbacca, you were looking at 60,000 credits or a minimum of 40,000 credits. They did the calculations, and they saw that the amount of time to achieve that fixed ratio, 40,000 credits reinforcement, you would need about 2,400 minutes of gameplay. That is like, do the math, 400 hours, I think, of gameplay just to unlock a single character. Way too long, way right out of the box, and that's why people basically went online and this got all the horrible feedback that it did. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about these ratio schedules? Well, because it explains the behavior. So we're going to see later on that the reason gamers are very hesitant to stop their game, even when they can save the game at any point, even when it's just super simple, they hit select, go to that save file, you can pick it up when you come back. They're very resistant to quitting that game, to stopping the game. And the reason is because of this fixed ratio schedule. So we'll see that fixed ratio schedules lead to not quitting until you have your particular achievement. All right, the other ratio schedule is a variable ratio schedule. And a variable ratio schedule is where your reinforcement is contingent upon a number of responses, but those responses can vary. Sometimes they're more, sometimes they're less. They vary around a certain number, but you never know whether the next response is going to be the one that gets reinforced. So for example, Sniffy could be on a variable ratio 20 scale. What that means is that on average, Sniffy is going to have to press that bar 20 times in order to get reinforced. But sometimes it'll be 20, sometimes it'll be 30, sometimes it'll be 10, sometimes it might take 60 presses. On average, it's only going to take 20, but you never know how many the next reinforcement is, when the next reinforcement is going to occur. So variable ratio 20, food is delivered on average after 20 presses. Variable ratio 57, food is delivered on average after 57 lever presses. And depending upon the design of the casino, of the slot machine games, this is the schedules that slot machines are on. So a slot machine, you don't know which button press is going to let you win the next jackpot. You might know that on average, 1 out of every 100 button presses is going to win you some money. You might know on average, 1 out of every 1,000 button presses is going to win you that jackpot. But you don't know where you are in the current intermittent reinforcement schedule. You don't know where you are on that current variable reinforcement schedule. So it might be the very next button press that leads to your reinforcement being delivered. Or it might take another 100 button presses. And what we find is that you're going to see there's a pattern of behavior here where these individuals have a very high rate of response. They'll just sit there, press that button, press that button, press that button. And importantly, they don't quit after reinforcement. So once they get reinforcement, once they win that jackpot, they just go straight back. Press that button, press that button, press that button. And we can see the similar behavior for people that are not addicted to gambling built into games like Candy Crush. So Candy Crush and other games become the phenomena that they do because people play them, they don't put them down, they just keep going and going and going. And when you play Candy Crush and you get reinforced by completing a level, you finally beat, level 181. Most people, when they do that, they don't say, okay, I'm going to take a break now. I've achieved it. Yes, here we go. What they'll say is, all right, I finally beat level 181. Let's do 182. And the reason for that is because Candy Crush is on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. Because whenever you play that level, you don't know if you're going to beat it the first time. You don't know if you're going to beat it the 5th time. You don't know if it's going to take you 30 attempts to beat this particular level. You might know on average it takes you about 10 attempts to beat a typical level. But again, you don't know if this is going to be the lucky one or if you're going to have to wait another 7, 8, 9 tries. All right, moving on. So those are the ratio schedules. Next one we got is the fixed interval schedule. So the fixed interval schedule, it's still a fixed schedule, but this time it's based on an interval. So reinforcement in this case is contingent upon the first response after a fixed period of time. And that's very important to remember. It's just one response. That's the only thing you need to do. You only need to have one response. However, it only counts after that fixed period of time. So if Sniffy is on a fixed interval 200-second schedule, Sniffy's going to be reinforced with food when he does the operant behavior of lever pressing. However, food is going to be delivered only for the first lever press after the 20-second interval has expired. So Sniffy can press that lever as much as he wants during that 20-second interval. Nothing is going to happen. But once that 20-second interval expires, that first lever press is going to lead to reinforcement. So if Sniffy had a watch, he would just be sitting there going, all right, 17, 18, 19, 20, cool. Boop. Get myself some food. All right, let's start it up again. 1, 2, 3, if he had a watch. So we're going to see the behavior that occurs here occurs because our own internal clocks, our own internal time mechanisms are not as accurate as a watch is. So if Sniffy was on a fixed interval 57-second schedule, again, what that means is that any responses during the 57-second interval do nothing. They don't accumulate. They don't do anything. They're wasted responses. But that very first response after the interval is going to be reinforced. One example of a real-world schedule that's on a fixed interval intermittent schedule is the parent who wants to reinforce good playing behavior, cooperative playing behavior, friendly playing behavior, but checks in on their children every 10 minutes. So let's say that you don't want to be hovering over your children, but you want to check in on them every once in a while. And you take out your smartphone and you set up a 10-minute timer. And you say to yourself, every 10 minutes, I'm going to open the door and I'm going to check in on my children. Very soon, your children are going to realize that they are on a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement. And for 9 minutes, this is what they're going to be doing. They're going to be fighting. They're going to be yelling. They're basically going to be doing all the behaviors that you don't want them to do. But after that 10-minute interval has expired and you open the door, that's what you're going to find. Because nothing that goes on during the interval is important. But once that interval expires, that first, huggy, nice, friendly, kissy playing, that's what's going to be reinforced. So they only have to do that after the interval has expired. And we're going to see what pattern of behavior emerges if you have children that either don't have a clock in their room or can't tell the time. We're going to see that there's a very characteristic pattern that occurs on this fixed interval schedule. All right, and the last one is the variable interval schedule. And this is, again, based on an interval, based on a period of time. But this time, the reinforcement is contingent, once again, on that first response. But this time, it's after a varying period of time. So it's after a period of time that can change, after each reinforcement. So once again, if Sniffy was on a variable interval, VI 20-second intermittent schedule, Sniffy is still getting reinforced for pressing the bar, still receiving food as a consequence. However, now food is going to be delivered for that first press, but this time the interval is variable. So it's on average 20 seconds. But sometimes Sniffy is going to have to wait 30 seconds. Sometimes Sniffy is only going to have to wait 10 seconds. Occasionally, he might only have to wait 2 seconds in order to get that next response reinforced. Sniffy doesn't know. He knows on average it's going to be 20 seconds, but doesn't know whether this time it's going to be 5 seconds or is it going to be 60 seconds. On average, it's 20, but he doesn't know when that period is going to expire. You can have a variable interval 57-second reinforcement schedule, where again, food is delivered for the first lever press after an average of 57 seconds. And one of the strongest examples of this type of an intermittent schedule, the variable interval intermittent schedule, was getting feedback, getting likes on your posts. When Facebook first came out, before it had push notifications on the phone. So if you want to experience this, if you want to put yourself back on that variable intermittent schedule of reinforcement, take the push notifications off your phone, or just rely on Facebook online on your computer, and you have to log in. And what scientists found is that, number one, Facebook was on a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. Because when you posted that picture of yourself, right, when you posted that perfect selfie you took after the 57th try, right, when you put on all your makeup and then you do the just rolled out of bed photo and you put that up, you don't know whether you're going to get somebody liking that photo after the first 5 seconds. You don't know if it's going to take an hour before somebody sees your photo. You don't know if it's going to take 2 hours before somebody sees your photo. You know that on average, maybe you get feedback within 15 minutes, but you don't know whether it's going to happen instantaneously or not. I've had posts that I put up on Instagram, and literally almost as soon as I've hit send, I get a notification that somebody liked my post. Other times it takes an hour before people see it. So it's a variable interval. And when you go back to check, when you log back in, again, get rid of the push notifications. But when you log back in to check, you don't know if you're going to get reinforced for that login. A certain period of time has to expire. It's a variable period of time before you get that like, and you don't know what that is. So what they found was that most people, weren't sitting on their computers, other than their birthday, weren't sitting on their computers going refresh, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh, 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 refresh. They weren't playing it like a casino, right? They weren't playing it like a slot machine. What they would do is they would post their selfie, and they would be like, all right, any feedback? No? And then they would leave. They would come back a few hours later. Oh, let me check my Facebook. Still nothing. All right. They would go back for another few hours, right? Come back in the afternoon. Let me check my Facebook. So it wasn't continuous. It was a very low level of checking Facebook. And again, this all changed with push notifications, but if you do want to experience it, take your push notifications off and just see how often you do check your social media feeds. All right. So those are the 4 basic intermittent schedules. As I mentioned, we study them because they lead to very characteristic patterns of behavior. These schedules, in and of themselves, doesn't matter the personality of the individual, doesn't matter the characteristics of the individual, these schedules by themselves will lead to certain patterns of behavior. So let's take a look at some of those patterns. We'll start off with the fixed ratio schedule. All right. So we're going to take a look at our cumulative recorder. So here we have our cumulative responses. So this, again, increases for every single response. The line gets higher and higher for every single response. A very steep line means that the responses are coming fast and furious. A very shallow line means that the responses are coming in very slow. That's time on the x-axis there. And if you put an organism on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement, this is the pattern of behavior that you're going to find. So this kind of step pattern of behavior is what is characteristic of a fixed ratio of reinforcement. So we know it's fixed ratio because the number of responses that you need between reinforcement, so to go from that reinforcement, that little slash there, to that reinforcement, that little slash there, takes a certain number of responses, and that number of responses does not change across the schedule. So it's a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement because you need a certain number of responses, and that stays constant in order to get to the next reinforcement. And this pattern is what you see. This is the pattern of behavior, and it's characteristic of very rapid responding. So when Sniffy starts pressing that lever, he starts pressing that lever. He starts going, and it's rapid responding, followed by what's known as the post-reinforcement pause. So as soon as Sniffy gets reinforced and gets that food, he'll take a break. He'll say, I pressed this lever 20 times. Well, he won't say this, but the thought process is basically, I pressed this lever 20 times, I've earned my food, let me take a break. And he'll take a break, and then once that break is over, once that post-reinforcement pause is over, the rapid responding will start up again. And Sniffy will be like, all right, let's do another 20 presses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Until, and he won't stop. He won't be like, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's enough. Let me come back to it later. No, he'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 20. And then once they get reinforced, once again, post-reinforcement pause. And it's because of the fixed ratio schedule that this pattern of behavior occurs. And this is exactly what we see in typical gamer behavior. Gamers are on a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement in many of the games that they play. So again, remember in Skyrim, they know how many points they need in order to get that next achievement. That is, they know how many responses they need in order to get that next reinforcement. So because of that, when a gamer starts playing and says, you know what, I want to get to level 4. I know I need 150 experience points. I want to get to level 4. I want to get that reinforcement. Let me start playing my game. They have very rapid responding. They'll just play. And they don't take breaks until they finally get that message. You know, awesome, you've leveled up to level 4. Here's your new skin, you know, here's your new bow and arrow or whatever. And then they're like, okay, cool. Let me save my game. I'm going to take a break. You know, I'm going to go to the bathroom and have some Mountain Dew. Whatever it is. They do that post-reinforcement pause. So they're very unlikely or very unwilling to take a break, even if they can, even if the save file is there. So Sniffy at any time can say, I pressed the bar 10 times, let me take a break. But because of that fixed ratio reinforcement schedule, organisms just don't. They do the whole thing in one shot. And then once they get reinforced, then they'll take a break. And they'll say, all right, now is the time that I'm going to pause. Until they get that urge to behave again, to play again, at which point they'll say, all right, let me get to level 5. Sit down, 4-hour session, no breaks in between. All right, so you're going to do this intermittent schedule for Sniffy exercise number 13, where you put Sniffy on a fixed ratio schedule. So for these schedules, use a Sniffy that's already been trained to bar press. So you might want to go back to your exercise number 5 save file, where Sniffy's been trained to bar press and he's just ready to go. In order to get full points for this assignment, you need to put Sniffy on a fixed ratio 50 intermittent schedule. That is, Sniffy needs to get to the point where he is pressing the bar 50 times in order to receive reinforcement. However, you do not want to be EA Games, who put out Star Wars Battlefront number 2 and had their fixed ratio schedule way too big right off the bat. So to avoid ratio strain, to literally avoid Sniffy rage quitting on you and saying, I don't care if I starve, I'm not pressing that bar, you're going to increase that fixed ratio schedule gradually. So you can choose your own increase in ratios. I recommend this one right here. So if Sniffy is on a continuous reinforcement schedule, start him off on a fixed ratio 5 schedule. Wait for Sniffy's behavior to stabilize with that nice step pattern with the rapid responding and the post-reinforcement pause. Then move him to a fixed ratio 10. Wait for it to stabilize again. Fixed ratio 20, stabilize, 35, and then 50. Because if you jump right to a fixed ratio of 50, what can occur is Sniffy might be pressing that bar, and Sniffy will be like, all right, I'm getting reinforced every time I press the bar. Now let me press the bar. Oh, I got nothing, right? That's one press out of 50. Let me press it again. nothing. Let me press it again, nothing. Let me press it again, nothing. Let me press it again, nothing. Do you remember what pressing something and getting nothing is called? It's extinction. So Sniffy can confuse this with extinction and basically say, oh, I guess I'm not getting, food anymore for bar pressing, and give up on you. Even if he doesn't give up, you won't get that stable pattern of rapid responsing and post-reinforcement pause. So for that assignment, bring Sniffy along gradually, wait for the behavior to stabilize, and again, you don't want people rage quitting on you. You don't want Sniffy rage quitting on you because he has to, play for 400 hours before he gets his next pellet. All right, so that was the fixed ratio schedule. Any questions on that or the behavior that it produces? All right. Next one, variable ratio schedule. You're also going to be doing this for Sniffy. Also has a very characteristic pattern of behavior. So once again, we go to our cumulative recorder. And unlike a fixed ratio schedule that had rapid responding followed by a post-reinforcement pause, variable ratio schedule pattern of responding looks like that. So this is a variable ratio schedule because if you look at the number of responses it takes to go from reinforcement to reinforcement, sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big, sometimes it's really big. It changes. On average, it stays the same, but the organism never knows if it's going to take a few number of responses to get to the next reinforcement, or is it going to take a large number of responses to get to the next reinforcement. So you can see that the number of responses between these reinforcements changes across the entire schedule. On average, it's the same, right? On average, it's a certain number of responses, but again, it's variable across the entire schedule. So what does putting somebody on a variable ratio scheduled reinforcement do? Well, it does this pattern of responding. It's characteristically rapid rates of response, so very quick responding. And also notice that there is no post-reinforcement pause. So once this organism gets reinforced, it doesn't stop. It gets reinforced and it just keeps on going. It goes right back to the behavior. So again, rapid responding followed by no post-reinforcement pause. And this variable schedule of reinforcement is all that you need to get somebody to do rapid responding with no post-reinforcement pause. And that's the schedule that slot machines use for their payouts. So you don't know if it's the next press of the button that's going to get reinforced. You don't know if it's going to take 20 presses before you get reinforced. You know that you're going to eventually get reinforced. And that's why slot machine players will sit there and play. Oh, I won? Great. Play. I won again? Perfect. Play. They don't take those post-reinforcement pauses. And the same kind of behavior occurred in a lot of mobile games, such as Candy Crush, where, again, when you start a level, you don't know if this is the time you're going to beat that level. You don't know if it's going to take you 5 times to beat that level. You might know on average it takes you 10 attempts to beat a level. But once again, you are on this variable ratio schedule, of reinforcement. So when you achieve a reinforcement, when you get to that next level, you don't take a break. Unlike the Elder Scrolls Battlefront game player that was on a fixed ratio schedule, players on Candy Crush will achieve that next level and then very often say, let's just do the next one. Let's continue with that rapid rate of responding. Let's not take a post-reinforcement pause. All right. So you're going to be doing this for Sniffy as well. So Sniffy exercise number 11 is where you're going to increase the value of Sniffy's variable ratio schedule. So for this one, again, you'll be, there's the first assignment, assignment number 10, you'll put Sniffy on a small variable ratio schedule. So you'll put Sniffy on a variable ratio 5 schedule. And then on exercise number 11, you're going to be increasing that. And for full points, once again, you have to get up to 50. And for full points, do it gradually. So once again, take Sniffy from a variable ratio of 5 to a variable ratio of 10, once you get that stable pattern of continuous rapid responding with no post-reinforcement pauses, take them up to 20. Once it restabilizes, take them up to 35 until you get sniffy all the way up to 50. Now, while we're on the subject of sniffy, one of the things that you can do to kind of move this along is there is accelerated time in the Sniffy virtual program. So you can literally put Sniffy on fast forward, where Sniffy will, basically go into hyperspeed, and you can compact, hours of training into a few minutes. Feel free to use that, so you don't have to wait around for Sniffy to press the bar 50 times. You can just fast forward Sniffy. That's completely fine. But be very careful with it, because on your cumulative recorders, if you've been training Sniffy, you'll notice that cumulative recorder runs out. Cumulative recorder number 1 runs out, and then it starts up cumulative recorder number 2. When cumulative recorder number 2 runs out, it'll start up cumulative recorder number 3. Keep going. When cumulative recorder 9 runs out, it'll start up cumulative recorder 10. When cumulative recorder 10 runs out, Sniffy will quit, and it'll just fall asleep in your operant conditioning chamber, and you won't be able to train Sniffy anymore. So all of these can be done well within that 10 cumulative recorder limit. So just be aware of that. If you put Sniffy on accelerated time, go to the kitchen and make yourself a sandwich, and you come back, Sniffy will be asleep, and your 10 cumulative recorders will be used up. If that occurs, then you just have to restart that particular assignment again. So just be careful. You can easily do this, within 5 cumulative recorders with no problem whatsoever. But again, if you do use that accelerated time, just be aware, Sniffy retires from the operant conditioning chamber after those 10 cumulative recorders. All right. 2 more intermittent schedules to go. Next one, the fixed interval schedule. This one again, first response after a particular period of time has elapsed is the one that gets reinforced. And the pattern of behavior that occurs on a fixed interval schedule, if you don't have a clock or a timing mechanism, all right, so this is when an organism is using their own internal time, you get this pattern of behavior here. So we know that this is a fixed interval scheduled reinforcement because the time between reinforcements, that interval there is the same. It does not change. How many responses occur inside the interval does change, but the time between reinforcements, that doesn't change across the interval. The pattern of behavior we get is known as this scalloped pattern. It literally looks like somebody took big shovelfuls out of a hill, and we get this kind of curved shovel pattern where we have very low rates of response followed by accelerated rates of response. So in this case, what happens is you do get a post-reinforcement pause on this fixed interval schedule of reinforcement, and then you get very and increasingly rapid responding as that interval draws to a close. So once Sniffy gets reinforced on a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement, Sniffy will take a break. Sniffy will say, oh, I just got reinforced. I got to wait a while. I got to wait another 20 seconds. But then during that interval, Sniffy's going to start saying, has it been 20 seconds yet? I better check, and presses the bar. No, it hasn't. It's only been 12 seconds. And then Sniffy's going to think, is it 20 seconds now? Presses the bar. No, it's not. It's only been 15 seconds. And then Sniffy's going to think, it's got to be 20 seconds now. Presses the bar. No, it's not. Well, it's got to be now. Now. It's got to be close. Bar. 20 seconds elapses, presses the bar, gets reinforced. Sniffy's like, well, I guess I can wait again. So that's that scallop responding. That post-reinforcement pause, because the organism knows it has to wait, but without that timer, without that clock, you don't know if the schedule has elapsed or the interval has elapsed, so you start pressing the closer it gets to the interval. So we'll wrap it up with one last example here, and then we'll do the final schedule next time. So this is what happens if you check in on your children every 10 minutes on that fixed interval scale. And you reinforce them for friendly, cooperative behavior. What's going to happen is for a long time, they're going to be doing this. They're going to be fighting. They're going to be, playing inappropriately during that interval. Once you open that door, though, that's what you're going to find. Because when that interval when they feel that interval starting to expire, they're going to say to themselves, they're going to say, you know what? I think it's been 10 minutes. Quick, hug me. I'm going to punch you in the face later, but just hug me right now. And it's like, oh, it's not 10 minutes? Okay, well, no, just keep hugging. It's got to be 10 minutes now. Just hug, 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 hug. Door opens. The parents are like, aw, that's so nice. My two children, playing so nicely with each other. All right, I'll be back later. Close the door, post reinforcement pause, and start fighting with the person until 7 minutes goes by, and then you're like, okay, is it now? No. All right, punch, punch, punch. Now? No. Okay, choke, choke, choke. Now, let's keep hugging. Hug, 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 hug. And that's what you get. So that's why it's actually a very poor idea, if you do want to reinforce cooperative play, to check on your children after a specific period of time. So just to kind of wrap up this one interval, you will be putting Sniffy on a fixed interval schedule, much like the other ones. Avoid that ratio strain. Take them from a fixed interval of 5 to a fixed interval of 10, gradually up to a fixed interval of 50. You should see that nice scalloped pattern, so wait for Sniffy's behavior to stabilize. And notice that you need to take Sniffy from a low schedule reinforcement, intermittent schedule reinforcement to a high level, even if he's coming off a high level. So if you just finished with Sniffy on a variable ratio 50 schedule, he's not ready to jump to a fixed interval 50 schedule. You need to bring him along slowly, regardless of what schedule he's coming off of. All right, so